Hello everyone. So today we'll be presenting our case study analysis about Milford Police Department. So our group consists of Clara, me, Iman Nur Sya'ema, Hazel Ann, and also Fellycia. So we'll start with individual factors of the case study first.
So for the first issues, limited opportunity for learning and leadership development. This is associated with learning. So in these issues, there are no formal programs or academics for developing supervisor skill lah. So promotion relies more on into networking or exam lah. So rather than on actual experience lah. So the lack of development opportunities might affect to reduce in overall motivation within the department. So we assume that the captain view that continuous learning and structured leadership training are essential to improve management effectiveness lah. While new initiative such as performance-based promotion, they show progress, but there is still lack of leadership skill lah. So the evidence can be found on chapter 12, which highlight from the officers they have a problem in the department leadership. There are plenty of bosses, but only few of them show leadership skills lah. And it seems that there should be a training for bosses instead of just for the new officer. So moving on to issues 2, which are technical and practical competence among officers. This is associated with the abilities and skill. So based on the case study, officers now face a rising demands on to master new technologies, to adapt and adopt with new technologies such as PDS, GPS. So there might be a practical inconsistency between the older and younger officers. In terms of the younger officers might be excellent in technologies, while the older or veteran officers might be excellent in real life situation. So there might be a tension between the younger officers and the older officers because of generation gaps. So based on the assumption, the captain career background, they show technical and academic training, professional effectiveness lah, from his Navy experience, law enforcement education, which provide him problem solving, leadership, and operational skills that support the advancements of the department. But as the policing system are developing, so some officers may struggle to adapt. So the evidence can be found on chapter 3, where he said that he spent 5 years in the Navy and continued in the military education. And on chapter 5, 6, and 11, where he stated that he have seen a lot of system change for the past 22 years of his working experience. So moving on to issues 3, which are the decline in intrinsic motivation and generalization differences in work value. So in these issues, from the case study analysis, we can see that the older officer view the job only as a duty, lifelong career lah. But the younger officer see it only as a job rather than a lifelong career. Because of this is because of the driven toward extrinsic motivation lah, macam external award. So this could lead to less commitment, and also could lead to high turnover. So we assume that older officers are more passionate and committed to the job. The younger officers are driven toward external motivation lah, macam high salary, looking for a better department. So the evidence can be found on chapter 7, 8, and 9, where the statement are the young guys don't really seem as committed to being a cop as when the officer first started. They treat this like a job rather than a profession, and they all use the sick time. They're always looking to join a better department where the pay scale is higher. Moving on to issue 4.
Okay, so now I'll start with the fourth issue for individual factors, which is reduced job satisfaction caused by ineffective leadership and rigid work climate. So this issue mainly about officers that felt unhappy and unsatisfied with the department at work, which lead to lower morale and less feeling of interested in the job. So the rigid work climate also limit the officer's sense of autonomy, thus make it hard to express their idea and making decisions. So over time, that kind of situation leads to frustration, emotional strain, and withdrawal behavior. So we assume the assumption that we made from that is that the officers take pride in their work but feel frustrated due to rigid rules and unsupportive management, thus showing that leadership lacks empathy and emotional awareness. So the evidence about this are shown in the chapter 9 and 12. But chapter 9, they mentioned about that they like their work but they don't like their bosses because there are too many rules we have to follow in the department, and the pay is just enough, and they can only get promoted if they are lucky and study hard. And the other evidence is that they said there are plenty of bosses, but not many of them are leaders, which show that some of them play tough and threat their officers with 3-day suspension for making mistake. If the officer dares to speak back, it might go up to 5 days off without pay. So they don't really show the true value of being a leader. It's just being tough and all. So now we're gonna move to team factors. Okay, so the first issue in team factors is that about supervisor legitimacy crisis. It's about the credibility of someone being a leader in that department. So the younger bosses who were quickly promoted through the new system don't always have the respect of the older subordinates, those who question their immediate authority because they got promoted just because they have passed the promotional exam. So the assumption is that the immediate leadership structure is undermined because subordinate operates under the assumption that supervisory respect is earned through long tenure and field experience, not simple formal rank or objective competence exam gained through testing. So this creates a subordinate-driven challenge to team leadership authority. So the evidence is found on chapter 3, 6, and 14, where the passage mentioned that some of the new cops score better on promotional exam and get promoted faster. That means that the younger bosses don't always have the respect of the older subordinates. Like the older subordinates found that they just might, so they don't have like enough basic field experience about their job. And the older cops who are not promoted just get older and more cynical towards the younger cops. And also, it seems they also a passage mentioned that it seems like there should be a training program for bosses, just like there's one for new officers. So like sorts of an academy for supervisors. So the next issue in team factors is that about unmanaged diversity and intergroup rivalry. So a cultural and structural issue where the department increasing diversity has led to competition and bias rather than integration. Because the department demographic has changed with more black and female officers, which led to open rivalry and competition between black and Hispanic officers over promotions. This is worsened by a perception of bias as supervisors treat female officers with kid gloves for fear of being accused of bias. So upon of that, a toxic scorekeeping culture has developed. So the assumption that we can get that the organization leadership has taken a passive, hands-off approach to diversity. They assume that simply hiring diverse officers is the end of the job, but they fail to actively manage the cultural dynamics. So it leads to infighting, interfighting of the department, resentment, and a breakdown of unit cohesion. So the evidence was mentioned that now the department is almost 40% female. That makes it tougher for the supervisor because even though the law says that they should treat female and male equally, but in reality the women get treated with kids' gloves, like they're being treated more softer than the male officers because the bosses are afraid of being accused of bias. So, and another one is that in recent years, more black people have gotten on the force, and now black officers outnumber the Hispanics. So this has led to rivalry and competition, particularly when it comes to promotion exam. Everybody counts to see how many white, black, and Hispanic officers are promoted. Since the Hispanic have more seniority, they expect to have more promotion, but the black figures, since there are more of them, there should be proportionally more black supervisors. So now we'll be moving on to the next issue.
So the next issue, which is third issue, is conflict from rigid seniority based shift as assignment, which is the department strictly follow the seniority rules, which is this view as an unfair practices, while the police because the policy places the rookies on the most difficult night shift, while for the senior they put them in a better schedule. So this action, they see this action as an intensity intergroup conflict and preventing effective knowledge transfer, which can contribute a challenge in terms of team cohesion. So the assumption is the organization reliance on strict seniority rules and it is an ineffective and politically charged practice. So we assume that the rewarding is more important than deploying the experienced team to high-risk situation. So the evidence can be found in the chapter 10 and 12. There's 4 evidence. First one is new hires and newly promoted officers who work what we call graveyard. The night shift from 10 to 7. They have to wait until someone is quit. Second is from chapter 10 and 12 also, but it's a bad from a law enforcement standpoint because there's a natural tendency to have a lot more problems during graveyard hours than at other times. The third and fourth also from chapter 10 and 12. For the next issue is issue 4, which is performance degradation via burnout. overtime is exhaustion and high stress can increase the duties, lead to the measurable decline in team function. This can cause the officer to snap at each other and civilians. So this can increase police cruiser wreck due to distraction. This also fueled by overtime that used to be a big reward, but now they see that as a punishment. So the assumption is the team's high performance and safety standards are compromised because the organization failed to manage the workload, lead to the chronic collective fatigue. So this exhaustion is directly assumed to cause a negative group interaction. So the evidence can be found on chapter 10, both. First one is all of this extra responsibility has means lots of overtime, which is overtime used to be a big reward, but now it's a punishment and it's look like sick leave is off the chart. Second one is some of the officers are snapping at each other and civilian, and a week does not go by when we don't have at least one police cruiser in the wreck. For the organizational factors, the first issue is conflicting philosophies in recruitment and selection, which is the structural issue, whereas the department official method for hiring the new officer is a direct from with the value of its veteran officer. So the department have to move from a traditional physical based hiring model to a modern one, which is by using personality tests and also interview about the values and ethics. So the veteran leadership, like captain, they don't trust or understand this new system. So because of this, it created a belief that the new breed of a new officer is less committed. So the assumption is the department's veteran leadership assumed their old straightforward selection method was superior, and they believe that testing for personality is a waste of time. And it is direct because of a declined work ethic, and new recruits thus create a generalization divide from the moment of hiring. So the evidence we can get from, there's three evidence. First one is from chapter 7, 8, and 9, which is there's new breed of officer that I've been seeing is the past 5 to 10 years, and I can't say I like it. For the second one is from chapter 3, when I started only the best get higher. The person who got the highest score on the civil service test and was the fastest and the strongest on the physical ability test was the person who got higher. For the last one is also from chapter 3, which is now in addition to the civil service test, recruits and interview about things like interests and values and ethics. They also take a personality test, whatever it is, and they fulfill out a form about what they like and don't like in a job. I don't understand why they change the system. Next is second issue of organizational factors.
Okay, thank you, Feli. Moving on to the second issue for the organizational factors, which is the systemic burnout and poor organizational well-being. So what we heard previously by individual factors and team factors, we can see that the police department is experiencing a systemic organizational failure, which result in a widespread employee burnout. So one of the texts shown that the officers are expected to do so much more after post 9/11 duties, but they keep having the same number of officers, which leads to a massive increase in workload. So this understaffing has turned those overtime from a big reward into a punishment that indicate a severe work-life imbalance and being forced on employees. So this leads to a high sick leave, interpersonal conflict, and even a high rate of accidents. So we assume that the leadership is treating the symptoms of burnout, such as sick leave, accidents, and bad attitudes as individual failings. They are ignoring the fact that these are the logical consequences of their own organizational decisions to increase workloads without increasing the resources. We got the evidence in chapter 10, whereby it says that it got a lot worse after 9/11 because we've been expected to do so much more, but with the same number of officers. Also, all of this extra responsibility has meant lots of overtime, and those used to be a big rewards, but now it's a punishment. So moving on to issue number 3, which is the defensive organizational culture. So the organization maintains a defensive mindset and a profound distrust toward the external bodies such as the courts, prosecutors, and the mayor's office, and believe that this won't support them. So the collective belief causes the police to see those entities in separate of the justice system and impeding collaboration and accountability. So the assumption is the organization's dominance culture assumes that all external justice and municipal entities are hostile and unsupportive. So this pervasive belief system justified and reinforced an isolationist defensive organizational boundary, which leads to behaviors that actively undermine the collaboration and accountability within the wider criminal justice system. We can see that evidence mostly in chapter 14 and also chapter 5, where they said that they don't really trust anybody except other cops. So the court seems to bend over backwards to give the perps a break. And on the other hand, they can disagree with my officers that the system seems to be working against us and what we are trying to do. But in chapter 5, this is why the police force feels defensive against the rest of the city government. Finally, issue number 4 is technological modernization. So the departments using digital tools such as PDAs, GPS, and data system demonstrate modernizations, but also technological overload. So the older officers or the seniors officers, they are feeling quite overwhelmed and stressed, which leads to frustration and decreased productivity. So the lack of proper training and support reveals the implementation and limited understanding of the employees' readiness. So we've seen that introducing advanced and new technology to older officers would automatically increases the efficiency and professionalism among them. And without proper training and adaptation, it may create operational stress and also technological resistance. We can see this in chapter 3 and 10, whereby it says that they don't realize that we are being suffocated with equipment. And they thought that police officer would love coming to the 21st centuries. And according to them, we can use computers, GPS system, and listens to department podcasts. So that's it for our case study presentation. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.